During the First World War, much of Europe was controlled by empires, the British, German, Russian, and Austro-Hungarian. But each of those empires had smaller states and peoples within them, and today I'm going to look at one of the Austro-Hungarian ones, Croatia. I'm Indy Nidell. Welcome to a Great War special episode about Croatia and the First World War. Croatia had close relations with the Habsburg Empire going back centuries. Indeed, a Croatian and Slavonian military frontier existed already in the 16th century and served mainly as protection from the Ottoman Empire, though Croatians fought as mercenaries all over Europe in struggles like the 30 Years' War. They wore knotted scarves that impressed the Parisians, who called them cravats, which was a corrupt pronunciation of Croat, and they were the forerunner of the modern necktie. After the Compromise of 1867 created the bipartite Austro-Hungarian Empire, the crown lands of Croatia and Slavonia were basically merged and put under Hungarian jurisdiction. Levin Rauch became the new Ban, which is sort of like a viceroy military commander. His unionist party advocated closer ties to Hungary, and once they had secured a majority in the Croatian parliament, partly through terror tactics, they passed the Croatian-Hungarian settlement in 1868, which said that the triune kingdom of Croatia, Slavonia, and Dalmatia accepted subordination to Hungary. There was, though, a trialist movement that wanted Croatia to have equal standing with Austria and Hungary, making a tripartite empire. Hungary was strongly opposed to this, but since Croatia didn't have revolutionary or secessionist tendencies, there were many Austrian politicians and royals who gave this some support. The most distinguished of those was the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. As you may guess, his assassination in June 1914 had quite an effect in Croatia, especially in Zagreb, the capital. Already that evening, there were demonstrations around Croatia. Most of these began as mourning processions, but ended up as anti-Serbian riots. The following day, properties were damaged and the authorities prohibited all meetings without prior permission. Still, one paper wrote, "Real panic broke out in Zagreb when people heard about the assassination. They gathered on streets, besieged the newspaper offices. Up to 50,000 copies of a single paper were published." After the Austro-Hungarian ultimatum to Serbia, the Croatian press expressed full, united support. This is less impressive than it might seem, since Serbian and socialist papers were banned at the time. The emperor ordered a partial mobilization July 25th, and 2 days later, men began arriving in Zagreb barracks, accompanied by cheering crowds. On August 18th, though, the first transports of wounded soldiers came from the Serbian front, and some of the reality of the war began to sink into the general public. During the war, there was little action on Croatian territory, so the army fought elsewhere. That army was part of the Royal Hungarian Army, but it had special status. Croatians served military service in Croatia. Training was conducted in Croatian, and the chain of command spoke Croatian, and Croatian military units took Croatian names. There was the Royal Croatian Home Guards, for example, where all commanders up to generals were Croatian. In the summer of 1914, the 13th Croatian Slavonian Corps and the 16th Dalmatian Herzegovinian Corps both fought in Serbia. In 1915, 13 Corps was sent to Galicia and the 16 Corps to the Italian front, which made sense since many believed the Dalmatians were directly threatened by Italian plans for the Dalmatian coast. They would remain on that front for the rest of the war and were joined by the 13th Corps in 1918. There were also Croatian forces that fought on the Western Front in 1918, and there were Croatian artillery units attached to Austro-Hungarian batteries in Sinai and Palestine. There was also the 42nd Infantry Home Guard Division, 14,000 strong and nicknamed the Devil's Division. They fought on the Serbian front from day one, seeing action at Cer and Kolubara. Heading to Galicia later on, they were nearly wiped out and then moved to Italy in early 1918. Except for 1 month of the war, every commander of the Devil's Division was a Croat. In case you were wondering, Croatian military losses during the war are estimated at 137,000 men killed, although a lot of paperwork has been destroyed, so that really is just an estimate. Now, Croatia did not have separate aviation troops, so Croats served in the Imperial and Royal Aviation Services. The most important figure in Austro-Hungarian aviation was the Croat Milan Emil Uzelac, the man who started it all. After years of service in the Imperial Army, he was made commander of the Austro-Hungarian Imperial and Royal Aviation Troops in 1912. His big problem then was the lack of everything: personnel, raw materials, and especially understanding from higher up. See, before he took over, Austria-Hungary only used observation balloons in the skies, but he developed a formal training program for pilots. That summer was the legendary summer road trip of 1912, when, that summer, Franz Ferdinand and Army Chief of Staff Franz Conrad von Hotzendorf managed to get Emperor Franz Joseph to visit an air show, where he was impressed and subsequently granted Uzelac more funding. A couple years later, the war broke out. Uzelac was promoted to colonel and forbidden to fly, since Austria didn't want to lose its only experienced aviation commander. But he was an avid flyer and apparently flew all the time whenever he could get away with it. The Austro-Hungarian Air Force never expanded to the degree he wished, but it did field up to 500 frontline aircraft in service at once and produced 49 flying aces. Croats were quite numerous in the Navy. In fact, by 1915, 34% of the Austro-Hungarian Navy was Croatian. There was a little action on the Croatian side of the Adriatic Sea, and it was Croats who led the Cattaro Mutiny in 1918, where sailors demanded an end to the war, although the biggest act of disruption by Croats were the Green Cadres. These were bands of men, mostly in 1917 and 1918, who hid in Croatian forest lands, often aided by poor local farmers. They pillaged wealthy farmers, robbed traders, and even burned down a few castles of the nobility. By the end of the war, there had been around 50,000 people in Green Cadres. There were actually 4 types of them, though the lines were often blurred. The anti-war, mostly deserters trying to avoid capture. The socio-revolutionaries, with ideas often taken from the Russian Revolution, who had a sort of a Robin Hood thing going on, rob from the rich and give to the poor. Bandits, who were just plain criminals, and returning soldiers trying to get home by any means, being forced to pillage to survive by the chaos and anarchy at the end of the war. As for Croatian independence and post-war unification, you could see that really take off in the spring of 1918. In early May, more than 10 political parties came together and passed the Zagreb Resolution, which said in part, "We are asking for independence, unification, and freedom, in which the noble qualities of a single nation with 3 names, Slovenes, Croats, and Serbs, would be preserved." This resolution was the foundation on which the National Council of Slovenes, Croats, and Serbs was established in early October. On October 16th, Emperor Karl gave his manifest on transforming the empire into a federal state. On the 25th, the state of Slovenes, Croats, and Serbs was officially proclaimed. On November 8th, the Serbian government, the National Council, and the Yugoslav Committee signed a declaration that made the Kingdom of Serbia an equal with the new state. And on December 1st, 1918, the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes was formed. Unification, in some form or other, would continue until the 1990s. All of that, though, is beyond the scope of this channel. Today was just a brief look at one part, and a fairly major part, of one of the mighty empires fighting this war that would cease to exist as the war drew to a close. You should look it up for yourselves to go deeper into it, for Croatia is a very interesting subject. Thank you, Goran Rasic, for the research for this episode. If you want to learn more about Svetosar Borojevic von Bojna, you can check out our bio special about him right here. And like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. See you next time.